He stood at her bedside every day for 6 days. While she lay unconscious in a hospital in Northern Ireland, he was there, sitting, waiting. The man who had driven her to the ambulance. The man who had told police what happened to her. He was still there when she died. And for months after that, his version of events was the official record. Her name was Katie Simpson. She was 21 years old. She loved horses. She was, in the words of people who knew her, bright and funny and fearless. And somewhere in rural Northern Ireland, in a field, her mobile phone was hidden in the grass. It would stay there for 7 months. Nobody was looking for it, because nobody knew it was missing. This is the story of how that happened, and how it almost stayed that way forever. To understand who Katie Simpson was, you have to go back. Not August 2020. Much further. Tynan. A small village in County Armagh, in the rural south of Northern Ireland. A place where families stay for generations. That's where Katie grew up. Her parents were Jason and Nolene. She had sisters, Christina and Rebecca, and a brother, John. She was a former pupil of the Royal School Armagh. People who knew her there would later reach for the same words. Bright, funny, fearless. From around the age of 8, Katie spent as much time as she could at a yard near her family home in Tynan. 3 times a week. Sometimes more. She was the kind of child who arrived before she was needed and stayed after everyone else had gone. The early mornings didn't put her off. The smell of a stable at dawn, the patience required to earn an animal's trust, none of it put her off. She loved all of it. And she was good at it. By the time she was a teenager, she was competing at regional show jumping events. Clear rounds on horses with names like Creva Bliss and Reuben James. A young woman from Armagh who was completely at home in the saddle. That yard near Tynan was where she belonged. It was also where she first met the man prosecutors would later say took her life. In the summer of 2020, something was shifting. A new relationship. Someone outside the world she had been living in. A quiet beginning that, for the first time in a long time, seemed to offer a different kind of future. People who knew her noticed. She seemed hopeful. Hold that detail. Because according to prosecutors, it was that hope, that new relationship, that would ultimately set the final events of August 2020 in motion. There is a file that would eventually contain nearly 2 decades of information about Katie Simpson's life. A 270-page independent review, commissioned by Northern Ireland's Justice Minister and conducted by a safeguarding expert, that pieced together, year by year, appointment by appointment, incident by incident, everything the systems around Katie had known. And everything they had missed. One of the things it documented was this. Between 2003 and 2020, Katie Simpson attended accident and emergency departments 16 times. Head trauma, facial injuries, fractures, soft tissue damage, a broken back. 16 times across 17 years. We will come back to those 16 visits. More than once. Because each time we return to them, they mean something more disturbing than they did before. The yard near Tynan where Katie spent her childhood was where she first encountered Jonathan Creswell. He was older than Katie. He worked with horses. Known in the local equestrian world, charming, talented, quick-witted. The kind of person who filled a room with energy. He was also in a relationship with Katie's older sister, Christina. To the world around him, Creswell was simply part of the family landscape. A familiar face. At first, nothing about Jonathan Creswell seemed unusual. He was just the man at the yard. He was just her sister's partner. Years later, an independent review would characterize what Creswell was doing at that yard in very different language. But in the early years, nobody was looking that carefully. There were things in Creswell's history that, in a different system, might have prompted greater scrutiny. In 2010, he had been convicted of assaulting a previous partner, a domestic abuse conviction, on his record. After that conviction, he returned to work with children in the equestrian world. No Access NI background checks. No safeguarding requirements. He simply went back. In 2014, police had a direct encounter with him. He was observed fleeing a defective horse lorry, accompanied by a teenage girl believed to be Katie. 3 distressed horses were present. No follow-up investigation. No animal welfare referral. He drove away. 2 moments. 2 opportunities. Both closed without a second look. When Katie was around 16, something happened that would later become one of the most significant details in this case. She was found on a ferry to Scotland. A stowaway. She was brought back to her parents. The incident was recorded. And then it was closed. Nobody asked why a 16-year-old was hiding on a ferry. Nobody asked where she was going. Nobody asked whether she was running from something or someone. The Independent Review later described that moment as a missed opportunity, a door left wide open, that nobody walked through. By the time Katie was in her early 20s, the world she lived in had contracted almost entirely around Jonathan Creswell. She had moved to a house in the Gortnassy Meadows estate in Lettershandony, on the outskirts of Derry. Living there with her sister Christina, Creswell's long-term partner, the mother of his 2 children. Another young woman connected to Creswell also stayed at the property. From the outside, a family home. From the inside, according to the Independent Review commissioned by Justice Minister Naomi Long and conducted by Dr. Jan Melia, something very different was happening. The review describes what it concluded Creswell had imposed on Katie as a brutal regime: grooming, coercive control, verbal degradation, and physical abuse. It says he had stripped away her autonomy until she was trapped in a state of domestic servitude. And in the summer of 2020, Katie had quietly begun a new relationship. Creswell found out. On the morning of August 3, 2020, the streets around Gortnassy Meadows were quiet. An ordinary summer morning. What happened inside the house at Lettershandony that morning is known from evidence that investigators eventually gathered, evidence that was almost never gathered at all. The murder trial that opened in April 2024 alleged what prosecutors said Creswell had done when he discovered Katie had met someone new. He had beaten her. He had strangled her. And then, according to prosecutors, he had staged the scene to look like she had tried to take her own life. He drove toward Altnagelvin Area Hospital. Somewhere along the road, an ambulance intercepted them. Katie was in the passenger seat, unconscious, critically injured. He was driving her car. 2 police officers had responded to a request for assistance from the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service. They were at the roadside when he pulled up. And Creswell told them what had happened. She had tried to take her own life. He was calm. He was clear. He offered detail. He also mentioned, and another person present confirmed, that Katie had recently suffered a fall from a horse. An explanation, ready-made, for any physical evidence that raised questions. The ambulance took Katie away. And the version of events Creswell had constructed that morning began to harden. At the hospital, Katie Simpson did not regain consciousness. And Creswell came to sit with her. Every day. For 6 days. He was there when she died on August 10, 2020. She was 21 years old. And in the months that followed, the investigation into her death proceeded on the assumption that she had killed herself. In the weeks after Katie's death, reports started coming into police. People from the community who knew Katie. People who knew Creswell. Their message was consistent. This doesn't make sense. A suicide attempt was out of character. Something about the story felt wrong. Something about Creswell and his relationship with Katie needed to be looked at more carefully. Some police officers raised the same concern internally. Medical staff at the hospital, according to the police ombudsman's eventual report, had also expressed concerns about the circumstances of Katie's injuries. This intelligence was received. It was logged. It was viewed. It changed nothing. Here is what a proper investigation would have done on August 3, 2020. Treated the scene at Les Chandonniers as a potential crime scene. Conducted an effective search. Seized electronic devices. Secured the car for forensic examination. Taken blood samples from Katie. Photographed her injuries. Pursued the CCTV footage. Independently verified Creswell's account. Here is what actually happened. No supervisory officer attended the house. No effective search of the property was carried out. Devices inside the house were not seized or examined. The car was recovered but never forensically examined. CCTV footage existed, showing Creswell leaving Katie's address that morning, returning, and a woman removing a bag from the house and placing it in a second car. It was identified, not pursued. Blood samples from Katie, not taken. Photographs of her injuries, not taken. And there was one more thing not found. Katie's mobile phone. When investigators examined the property, they recovered 2 old phones attributed to Katie, old devices, not in use. Her current phone was not there. Nobody noticed. Nobody looked. For months, the investigation continued. And somewhere in rural Northern Ireland, in a field, in the grass, Katie Simpson's phone was waiting. What changed the direction of this case was not a forensic breakthrough. It was the refusal of a small number of people to accept what they were being told. A senior police officer. Members of Katie's family. People who kept raising their hands and saying the story was wrong. The police ombudsman for Northern Ireland was explicit about what would have happened without them. If not for those individuals, there is every likelihood that Katie's death would have been recorded as a suicide. A closed file. In March 2021, 7 months after her death, Jonathan Creswell was arrested. He was charged with murder. And the real investigation began. During a criminal interview following his arrest, investigators asked Creswell about Katie's mobile phone. He told them where it was. He had hidden it. In a field. That phone, sitting in rural Northern Ireland for 7 months while investigators concluded she had taken her own life, was recovered. What was on it? What did he need to make disappear? Now consider those 16 hospital visits again. Because the framework for understanding them had just changed completely. The independent review examined every one of those visits. Its conclusion was precise. The pattern of Katie's injuries, roughly 1 serious incident per year, escalating in severity across 17 years, should have triggered concern. Not one of those 16 visits triggered a safeguarding referral. Not one. And then the review reached a finding that reframes everything. It concluded that Creswell had begun grooming Katie when she was 10 years old. 10 years old. At that yard in Tynan. The place she had loved since she was 8. The review's language was deliberate. Katie was at risk from the moment she stepped through the yard gate. Every one of those 16 hospital visits. Every explanation about horses. She was a child the first time he targeted her. And the system that was supposed to protect children never connected those visits to the man at the yard. The picture of Creswell that emerged as a proper investigation finally began was not the picture of a respected equestrian figure. Olympic dressage competitor ABI Lyle has spoken publicly about a 9-month relationship with Creswell during which she says she was repeatedly assaulted. She described the equestrian world he moved through as close-knit and patriarchal. She described Creswell as talented, well-respected, funny. The kind of person whose social standing made him almost impossible to question. Katie's sister Christina, Creswell's own partner, the mother of his children, eventually made disclosures about what she herself had experienced. Years of abuse, hidden inside the same household where Katie lived. Since the investigation was properly opened, more than 37 women and men have come forward to allege abuse by Creswell. Many of them young riders at the beginning of their equestrian careers. The same age Katie had been when she first went to that yard in Tynan. The review found his abusive behavior had been concealed behind a charming facade. That the culture of the equestrian world, where authoritarian behavior was normalized and a skilled man's reputation insulated him from scrutiny, had allowed him to operate unchallenged for years. Jonathan Creswell's murder trial opened in April 2024. Nearly 4 years after Katie's death. On the first day, the prosecution opened its case. What had happened to Katie Simpson on August 3, 2020 began to be told in a courtroom, before a jury, on the public record. On the second day, Creswell did not appear. He had taken his own life. The verdict Katie's family had waited 4 years for was over before it could be reached. At the very last moment, he had again controlled the ending. But the trial had started. And what the prosecution had begun to lay before the court was on record. Prosecutors alleged he had beaten and strangled Katie after discovering she had begun a new relationship. That he had staged the scene to look like a suicide. That he had not done this alone. 3 women were subsequently convicted of helping him conceal what he had done, of cleaning blood from the property, of supporting his account, of reinforcing the story that Katie's injuries were consistent with a riding accident. 3 women who had maintained his lie while Katie lay dying. In November 2024, the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland delivered its findings. The initial investigation was flawed and had failed the Simpson family. A general lack of an investigative mindset. A willingness to accept at face value the accounts from Jonathan Creswell. Police had known, even at the time, that Creswell had a prior conviction for assaulting a previous partner. They knew. The ombudsman's conclusion was measured and precise. If not for concerns raised by a small number of individuals, both inside and outside the PSNI, there is every likelihood that Katie's death would have been recorded as a suicide. It would also have exposed members of the public, particularly young women, to the continued risk posed by Creswell, whose actions, had they gone undetected, may have become increasingly emboldened. In May 2026, nearly 6 years after Katie's death, the full independent review was published. Dr. Jan Melia, former chief executive of Women's Aid Federation Northern Ireland, examined every institution that had touched Katie's life. The hospitals, the health trusts, the safeguarding bodies, the police, the equestrian community. Her finding on the initial police response was unambiguous. Not one officer thought seriously about abuse or control. Not one. She described institutional misogyny as a contributing factor, structural assumptions within institutions that made it systematically harder for a woman in Katie's position to be seen clearly. The review makes 16 formal recommendations. Mandatory safeguarding training and vetting in equestrian facilities. Stronger forensic standards in domestic abuse-related deaths. Enhanced police oversight. Better multi-agency coordination. Clear reporting routes for young riders, grooms, and parents. She was let down at every step. Katie's father Jason said their daughter had been stolen from them. Her mother Nolene said that but for the persistence of a few individuals, inside the police and in the family, the man charged with her murder would still be out there. They endorsed the release of the full 270 pages. Every missed referral. Every UN-asked question. Every door that didn't open. So that no one could claim they didn't know. The PSNI issued a formal apology. Justice Minister Naomi Long asked the Northern Ireland Assembly to pause and remember Katie. She called the review uncomfortable reading and noted it was published in its entirety so that all could reflect. For 7 months while the official story hardened, the truth was sitting in wet grass in a field in rural Northern Ireland. He had put it there because he believed nobody would look for it. He was right. Until he wasn't. There is a version of this story where nobody knows the truth. Where a 21-year-old woman from Tynan, County Armagh, dies in a hospital, and the file is closed, and the man charged with her murder walks away. For months, that was the version being written. But her family refused to let it become permanent. And because they refused, the world now knows the truth. Katie Simpson. Bright, funny, fearless. Remember her. And if you want more cases like this one, crimes that the mainstream won't touch, subscribe to this channel. We are here every week. We will see you on the next one.
Like I said, it was, you wonder why, you know, that she was treated in this way. She mightn't have got the justice that she'd wanted, but I believe that people think they're above the law, but you're not above God's law, and you know, no matter what you do, it'll never be as, you know, you'll not get away with it. Yeah, there needs to be definitely more safety guards around the equestrian world. Like, I think girls' love for horses is an awful drive for them, and to get on as well. Like, you know, it's very hard for young girls. Like, you know, I think other older girls that are in the industry really have to be looking around them and, you know, looking after the young ones coming up, because there won't be that many men who will.